Absolutely. And I think we've mentioned it a few times. So I want to define what that is before we go any further, because we've already said the word a few times. And I want to define kind of how it applies to astrology and how it applies to tarot. So the definition that we're going to use today is from the American Psychological Association. Mm-hmm. And archetypes are universal inborn models of people, behaviors, or personalities that play a role influencing human behavior. They were introduced by Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung, who suggested that these archetypes were archaic forms of innate human knowledge passed down from our ancestors. So the APA is a scientific organization. Carl Jung is a huge part of psychology, especially archetypal and, introspection type of psychology. But he is on the borderline of where the woo meets the science. Yeah. So we're talking about, innate human knowledge. And some people might argue, is there such thing as innate human knowledge? That's for another episode. We're going to just say that there is. Mm-hmm. And in tarot, those archetypes are encompassed by the imagery in the cards and the sequence of the cards. In astrology, those things are encompassed by the signs themselves, mm-hmm. and what they represent, their strengths, their weaknesses, and the universal symbols. For example, the sun. What does that represent? The sun. If you mention the sun to somebody, they're not going to think of Antarctica, the frost. They're going to think. A lot of us are going to think of very similar things. Mm-hmm. But if you live somewhere where the sun is scarce, it might be different than if you live in the tropics and what the sun represents. So that's how our personal lens over the universal archetype gives you that combination, will give you a very personal approach to each thing. Not everybody's going to come up with the same answer, but there also isn't technically wrong answers once you get the basics down, because there is a framework. Mm-hmm. A birth chart allows for the framework to be where the positions of the stars were the moment you were born and what that represents based on predetermined definitions of the signs and the planets. For tarot, there are astrological associations in tarot, so that is also borrowed from there, but there's also the individual imagery on the cards and what that represents. What are your thoughts on that, Nao?
Using both of these tools to kind of understand who you are, what role you're playing in your own story, has such profound benefits that I think that's probably why it's actually starting to hit the mainstream. Because I think, especially in what we call, say, the Pluto and Scorpio generation, or some would like to call us millennials, even though there isn't, those lines aren't, exactly overlaid onto each other. We are more focused in diving within us and seeking self-understanding as a way of making ourselves better people. We're looking at, especially we have the tendency to look at our parents and see the ways that they fucked up and were fucked up by their parents, and kind of these generational cycles that are spiraling through us. And we know that here in the present, we have the best advantage, or best positioned to do something about these generational cycles. But you can't do it just running on the assumption that you have never done any wrong, you never shall, or the fact that you're perfect, that we're not flawed. And I think both tarot and astrology are ways to navigate the acknowledgement that we are flawed beings, that we're complicated beings, we're complex beings. And sometimes we don't even understand ourselves very well. It's also really hard to make sense of what the heck is going on around us in our external environment. And I think tarot and astrology really can fit a role in helping an individual kind of orient themselves in the tableau of their lives. And while it can't always account for all of the external factors, it can kind of show you which of those external factors are influencing your internal dialogue the most in that moment. And I think that's what people want the most out of it now, because you're realizing that the bigger picture things, are outside of our control. I can't make COVID go away tomorrow. I can't make, the country be not in the economic toilet and make sure everybody has access to all of the things that they need to live healthy and productive lives. I can't do that. But what I can do is I can adjust how I react and how I experience it within the context of my perception of it. So I think tarot and astrology could be a really, really great tool for just making sense of this thing we call life.